Welcome to GDP's Graphics 1 2019. My name is Felipe Bellini, and this is a video demonstration of the final exam for this course. This addresses the classes lectured by Michael Finney at Fanshawe College. The final exam is about exploring shaders and features such as transparency, texture blending, combining, offsetting, and skyboxes. Open the final solution in Visual Studio 2019 and run the game project. Okay, so here's our scene. Right from the start we can see there's a skybox. That was the skybox that was shared during class. We have our mountain. Each student has a different sort of a mountain. It was generated using our names in MeshLab. So the first features we can see here is the water as it's moving. The water has a couple of interesting features such as transparency. For the movement of the water, I'm doing some shader calculations to offset the caustic water texture that we have for this project. We have also the sea floor. The sea floor now here, as you can see, this greenish sort of a color is a combination of the sand and the water, the caustic water, which is the same as the one that I'm using for the actual moving water. So the combination of yellow and the bluish gives out this kind of greenish thing, which kind of looks like the water is reflecting on the bottom of the sea. If we go far below here, we can see there's a few details here. This rift sort of a rift thing here is happening because the actual mesh, the actual model of the island has a bottom, which is a square, and I'm using discard to remove that part, as it was requested during the final. So that's one way to see that the discard is in action. You can see there's a line here. Yeah. So the first thing that I'm going to show here is a quick overview of our XML file. So if you've seen my previous videos, you know that I'm using XML to bind data to my games or my projects. It's a very easy way to incorporate things into code without having to actually hard coding stuff. So let's take a quick look at how this works. Here we have a collection of game objects, a collection of lights. There's 2 lights in this game, lights that for the whole environment and 1 light for the fishes and the sharks that you saw before. There's a couple of skyboxes here, 1 for the day, 1 for the night. We can see the textures here, 6 textures. In the case of this final project, I'm using a sphere to bind these textures to. Let's move on. So we also have a new structure called shader features. This is a collection of shader functionalities such as transparency, covering textures or a single object with a single texture, or blending textures in a single object, and so on. We can combine a lot of these features by using this. We have an example here. If we look at the terrain is using 2 features here. One of them is the discard by height, which means that it's clipping the first portion of the actual mesh, so it's not drawing the bottom part of the mesh at all. And the other one here is texturized by height, which means it takes a texture and applies a ratio to this texture according to the height of the mesh. So inside the shader, I know the height, the max height of the mesh, and then I calculate a threshold using these radios here to have different textures applied to the same model without having to blend them. This is a way to combine textures without mixing them up. There's a bunch of shader features that I'm showing you, shader functions that I'll be showing you just soon. For example, the flat water here that has the alpha transparency and the texture offset. Okay, so let's take a look at the shader, the fragment shader and the vertex shader, and see what we can find there. So now back to the code, I have the fragment shader opened here. So there's a bunch of shader features that are created for the last project and for this final also. So every function that starts with shader in its name is an actual shader function. So you can see that there's a shader colorize, which means that instead of using a texture, it will take the diffuse color of the object that's declared in the XML file and apply that to the model. There's texturize, which just applies a texture to the model. There's the familiar do not light shader. That was one of the first shaders that we came in contact with, where Michael was explaining to us how to better debug our code by using the shader. So we have the texturize by height here, the blend. So there's a bunch of methods, functions in the shader code that get called here. We have an array which holds IDs for each of these functions, and once the main starts, so for each vertex there's a for loop going through all the features that are available to this particular instance. So here we have skybox, imposters, reflection, refract. We have the texturizes, balancing, discard, alpha transparency, a bunch of things here that were implemented. And pretty much in the same way, there's a couple of features in the vertex shader. In the vertex shader, I've implemented the height map, which is pretty much quite similar to what was seen in class. In fact, it's almost the same code. So here we have a shader height map. It takes a height map and causes a texture to move like up and down according to a bunch of points. We can see this in the project 2 for graphics. So there's a good use for that in the project. Okay, that concludes our presentation. For more information, contact Michael Finney at Fanshawe College or Felipe Bellini. And thank you.